Welcome to this episode of the Leading in Dentistry podcast. I'm Dr. Wes Eggett. After spending the last 20 years in a variety of leadership positions, and as a student of leadership myself, I started Leading in Dentistry to share what I found and to continue learning with you. If anything from this episode stands out, check out the show notes, our online courses, or one-on-one coaching on leadingindentistry.com. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Leading in Dentistry podcast. I'm Dr. Wes Eggett. For those of you new to the podcast, I am a practicing associate dentist just outside of Denver, Colorado, and I started Leading in Dentistry to help develop the leadership skills of each team member in the dental office, not just the business owner. And I started this podcast specifically while I'm not an owner of any dental practice, as I really want to get across the message that you don't need to wait until you're in charge to be a leader. In this episode of the podcast, I want to talk about how to deal with different frustrations, and specifically those frustrations that lead you to question, should you quit your position? But since this podcast focuses on leadership not just from the perspective of the team member, but also that of the business owner or the office manager, those with positions of authority out there can also look at our discussion today from the perspective of, should I let someone go, which is essentially quitting on training someone. So there's a lot to take in here, and we'll look at how to solve different problems by using a 2x2 matrix. And this particular 2x2 matrix was developed recently after discussion with someone who's going through this exact decision. Shout out to you, you know who you are. But she was deciding, should I stay or should I go? And in thinking through that problem, we were thinking about how to act when you have different frustrations. And really, when you have a frustration or you're upset about something in your office, I think the key is to ask yourself two questions. The first is, can I change it? And can I tolerate it? So can I change it and can I tolerate it? And when you do that, when you ask those questions, you can put your answers on a 2x2 matrix. So things that you can tolerate and can change, things that you can tolerate but you cannot change. And what about things that you cannot tolerate but you can change them, or things you cannot tolerate and you cannot change them? So we'll go through these one by one and talk about what you would do in each of those frustrations. We'll end on the topic of things that you cannot tolerate and you cannot change, and should that lead to you quitting your job. So first, if you can tolerate a frustration, so it's something you can deal with it, and you can change it. So yeah, I can change it, but I can also deal with it. The thing you need to make sure of here with this frustration is to beware of complacency, because you know that you can change it, you know that you can do something better with it, but you can also tolerate not changing it. And so you may just coast. And that is a danger in leadership, because you know that you can bring your organization to a higher level. You know that you can experience some growth, but you're choosing not to. So if you can change it, and you can tolerate it, you want to beware of complacency. Now, let's say that you can tolerate it, you can deal with whatever the thing is that's frustrating you, and you can't change it. So if you can't change it and you can deal with it, then just redirect your focus. Focus on the things that you can change. I think that's a pretty straightforward solution. And then you have the things that you cannot tolerate, right? So you can't deal with it. It's something that it's a deal breaker, but it's something that you can change. So if there's something that you don't like, if there's a frustration that you cannot tolerate any longer, but you can make a change, then the solution is simple. Make the change, right? And I say that like it's easy. Sometimes it is hard, but being able to understand that you can do something about it helps you recognize that you have some power over the situation and helps encourage you to take that next step. And then the final situation with a frustration is that there's something you found that you cannot tolerate, but also you cannot change it. And this is where we're going to spend the bulk of our discussion today. If you can't tolerate it, if it's not something you can deal with, if it is a deal breaker and it's not something you can change, well, then you need to ask yourself that serious question. Should I quit? Should I find a new environment? And from the person with a position of authority, do I need to take this employee and help them find a new environment? If we cannot change this behavior in the employee, and it's not something that we can tolerate, then it's better for the organization to find a new environment. So in order to do that, it's a serious question and it has serious implications. And so you need to really think through that. And so today I wanted to give us a couple of questions that you can ask yourself in order to determine if you are ready to make that change. So here are the 4 questions I would go through before making this decision. And I'll just read off the questions, rattle them off one by one, and then we'll go back through and say a little bit more about them. So the first question is, have I clearly communicated my frustrations and expectations to people who can do something about it? The second question is, have I allowed reasonable time for improvement? The third question is, am I making this decision due to actual misalignment in values and goals, or to avoid the hard work of making changes? And the fourth question is, am I prepared to own the consequences of my decision? Just a quick interruption here. If you are looking to take your leadership skills to the next level, the next round of the 90-Day Leadership Development Program kicks off on April 7th, 2025. This is a guided program that I designed for dentists, office managers, and team members who want to create trust, set clear expectations, hold their teams accountable, and lead with consistency and heart. The course has on-demand training, self-assessments, bi-weekly coaching calls, and direct leadership troubleshooting, and you'll get everything you need in order to elevate your leadership. Spots are truly limited. I can only do this for a couple of people at a time, so head to leadingindentistry.com/courses to sign up. While you're there, check out the Team Lead Crash Course and the course on leadership for associate dentists as well. So let's go to that first question. Have I clearly communicated my frustrations and expectations to people who can do something about it? Now, this seems like a simple question, but there's really 4 parts to it. So the first is, have you clearly communicated, right? There's this quote from George Bernard Shaw, and he says, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. It's one of my favorite quotes on communication because we often assume that people are understanding where we're coming from. So the first part is, have you clearly communicated? The second part is, have you clearly communicated your frustrations? So the things that are bothering you. And then the next part is your expectations. So far we have 3 parts to this question. Have you clearly communicated, A, your frustrations, and B, your expectations? And then finally, the final part of this question is to people who can do something about it. Because oftentimes you are clearly communicating your frustrations and your expectations to a fellow team member who has no control over the outcome of whatever it is that you're trying to change. And so really asking yourself, have you clearly communicated your frustrations and expectations to people who can do something about it? Something that I've always said is unarticulated expectations are guaranteed disappointments. And if you're not clearly communicating those things, I guarantee you're not going to get the result that you are looking for. So that's the first question. Have I clearly communicated my frustrations and expectations to people who can do something about it? The second question is, have I allowed reasonable time for improvement? Now, this is baked into the onboarding process. We assume that people do not measure up to our expectations. And when they come in, we say, okay, you have 90 days, a 90-day probationary period, 90-day onboarding period. However it works in your organization, we automatically make the assumption that people need some time in order to learn something. Now, when people are not meeting our expectations or the organization is not meeting our expectations, oftentimes we're so quick to say, yeah, this isn't my thing, it's time for me to leave. Or, yeah, this employee just isn't doing it for me, it's time for us to let them go. When really you have to allow time for people to improve. There's this quote from Maya Angelou. She says, do your best until you know better. And when you know better, do better. And that quote, I think many people, especially in leadership, have heard before. Do your best until you know better. And when you know better, do better. But there's another quote from Maya Angelou that says, all great achievements require time. And if you are looking for progress to happen overnight, that's not going to happen. You have to get to this point where you say, in that little frustration matrix, there's a problem here that I cannot tolerate, and I know I cannot change it. But when I say something about it, have I given it adequate time to change from people who can do something about it? Am I allowing them the opportunity, or am I just going to double down on my frustration and try to escape the situation? That brings me to the third question. So the first question was, have I clearly communicated my frustrations and expectations to people who can do something about it? The second is, have I allowed reasonable time for improvement? And the third is, am I making this decision due to actual misalignment in values and goals, or to avoid the hard work of making changes? So oftentimes when we're trying to get out of a situation, when we have a frustration, it's to try to get back to some form of comfort, whether it is we are uncomfortable on a team and we're not willing to do the work that it takes in order to get to a level of comfort, we're going to walk away from it. Or if we are the person in the position of authority, we're not comfortable sitting down and having the important training and coaching discussions with people. And so we feel like it's much easier to just replace them with someone who comes pre-made to our expectations. And I guarantee you that in both of those situations, you're going to be dealing with someone who is starting from scratch. And oftentimes that feels like you're getting a clean slate. but you have someone already who's a part of your team, someone who wants to do well, and if you take the time to work with them, you're often going to get farther than if you had to start all over. And when I personally find myself in situations like this, there's a quote that really helps me. I don't know who said it, but the quote is this: "The magic you're looking for is in the work you're avoiding." And if you are the team member, the magic you're looking for, the solution to your problem, may be in just having the conversation and voicing your concerns. If you are the person in the position of authority, same thing. The magic you're looking for may be in just sitting down and doing the coaching that it takes in order to help take the person to the next level. And that's really going to test your leadership skills. But for me, it really helps me think through, why am I doing this? Am I just trying to become comfortable? Because I can become comfortable either through running away from the problem or trying to actually fix the problem. So once again, the magic you're looking for is in the work you're avoiding. And that big question here is, am I making this decision due to actual misalignment in values and goals, or to avoid the hard work of making changes? And that brings us to the fourth question. Am I prepared to own the consequences of my decision? Oftentimes, we've heard before that the grass is not always greener on the other side. The grass is greener where you water it. And it reminds me of this, one of my favorite SNL skits of all time with Adam Sandler. And he plays this guy who's a tour guide for tours in Italy. And he's, trying to sell these tour packages. But at the same time, he's really trying to manage people's expectations as to what they can get out of a tour in Italy. And he said, we have a lot of people who come thinking that Italy is going to solve their problems, and it won't. If you're a sad person at home and you get on a plane and come to Italy, you're still going to be the same sad you there. We can take you on a hike. We cannot make you someone who enjoys hiking. We can take you to tour a vineyard, but we cannot change the reason why you drink. So there's so many different situations in life where we think that just removing ourselves from the situation is going to improve things, but we haven't done the work on ourselves or on the people around us in order to create an environment where we can flourish. And remember, one of the biggest quotes in leading in dentistry, one of the things that is the guiding principle behind pretty much any decision that I make in leadership is from Simon Sinek, where he says, the job of the leader is to create an environment where people can work at their natural best. And when the leaders have to do that, that's one thing. But also as an employee, before you quit your job and try to find a new environment, try to make sure that there's nothing in the environment that you can change, that you have power over in order to create a better environment for yourself. Instead of just trying to remove yourself from the environment, you want to try to improve the environment. Asking yourself these 4 questions is going to help you do that. Have I clearly communicated my frustrations and expectations to people who can do something about it? Have I allowed reasonable time for improvement? Am I making this decision due to actual misalignment in values and goals, or to avoid the hard work of making changes? And am I prepared to own the consequences of my decision? My hope in sharing this is to help you recognize that maybe you don't have control over your situation, but you do have control over how you respond to your situation. And if your response is to jump towards leaving and going to a new environment where you may have the same problems, learning how to deal with those problems first, and making sure you've asked yourself if you've done everything you can in your power and allowed time for things to change before you jump ship is absolutely key. And it's not just to make sure that you're making the right decision, but it's also going to help you feel a sense of confidence that you've done all that you can, and it will help you move on to the next stage if you end up doing that with a feeling of certainty that you are going down the right path. And with that, always be leading and always be learning. We'll see you next time. And that's it for this episode of the Leading in Dentistry podcast. If you learned something today, please leave a 5-star review and share the episode with a friend. If you're ready to take the next step for yourself or provide leadership training for a team member, visit leadingindentistry.com to check out our online courses and one-on-one coaching.